Elissa Bjeletich. I'm here with Caleb Shoemaker, and as Melissa mentioned, we've just written the book, Blueprints for the Little Church, Creating an Orthodox Home. And so we are here today to talk to you a little bit about the book, but really about creating Orthodox rhythms in the home. And first, I think we should introduce ourselves a little bit. I'm the mother of 5. I'm a Sunday school director in Austin, Texas at Transfiguration Greek Orthodox Church. And I converted to Orthodoxy in 1999. So I came into the church and immediately was having babies and baptizing them and kind of becoming Orthodox while I was raising up an Orthodox family. So I think that's where, for me, the desire for a book that makes that a little easier, that maybe provides some company along that journey, that's where I got the need for that book. And then Caleb, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I also, father of 4, I've got 2 girls and 2 boys, and we also came into the church with little ones. My wife and I were baptized or chrismated in January 2012, and our youngest daughter was baptized that same day as well, at about a year old. So we were voracious readers when it came to our children anyway, and so looking for resources to help create patterns of orthodoxy in our family was a big deal for us, and so really a driving force behind writing the book. So I'm the stay-at-home dad. My wife works for 10,000 Villages, and I stay at home and homeschool our 4 kiddos, ages 7, 6, 3, and 1. And I also write books on the side. So when we got to, talk a little bit about writing the book and why we chose to write it. Some of this comes into Elissa and I's stories, like we were saying. There's so much to read, so much you could read about Orthodoxy and about personal spirituality, that the parents coming into the church or parents who are raised Orthodox who are looking to establish some of those rhythms into their family can get easily overwhelmed, especially when they read books, which may be a collection of letters from a priest to their spiritual child, or that may have been written by a monk, or may have been written 1700 years ago. What am I supposed to do with my family here and now in this modern world? And what am I supposed to do with all the assumed knowledge? That was something that Emily and I, my wife and I, really felt coming into the church, was that a lot of expectation. People just knew this sort of thing because they had been raised in it. And for us, trying to navigate all the assumed knowledge was really a challenge. And so I approached Elissa with this idea of writing a book that we wish we had had. And I was interested to see if other people had similar concerns or desires when it came to resources for families.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we both felt it coming in as converts. And I think that Caleb mentioned a little bit there, even if you were raised in the church, you don't necessarily, hit adulthood knowing everything. Maybe you didn't go to Sunday school, or maybe your family didn't fast, or maybe there are certain aspects of sort of the standard Orthodox practice that you didn't do in your house, or maybe you just weren't paying enough attention. You're not sure how to do them with your kids now. It's hard. There's so much. And I think, as Caleb mentioned, between all of the different sources that we have, so few of which are just modern American sources, it's hard to sort of translate them to modern experience. But we also get a lot of input, I think, from people, from grandparents, from aunts and uncles, from the old ladies at church will come to you and try to give you some advice. And it can be hard because it varies person by person, right? Like if you asked 100 Orthodox adults at what age a person is supposed to begin fasting, you will get, maybe 89 answers, right? There are a lot of different answers to that question. So we felt like we needed a book that would, on the one hand, explain things and kind of lay it out and give us the basics, but at the same time would not be maybe overwhelming or forceful or make us feel like we're kind of drowning in advice. So I think it worked out. I think it was a balance, but I think that it worked out.
Yeah, and that was the key, the balance, because so much information is given to us from so many sources that it's like, what am I supposed to choose? How do I celebrate that? How do I properly make Goliva? How do I set up an icon corner? I've never had an icon corner. What's an icon? how do I get my 3-year-old to pray with us when he can't keep his diaper on? In the stress of a modern world, it's really challenging to try and create these rhythms. And as parents, it can be so overwhelming that the temptation to give up or the temptation to go overboard is really, really strong. To find a system from a very long time ago on how to raise a pious family and trying to apply it today, or to be overly strict with our children in worship or at home, or to devil may care, say, well, they'll come around eventually. What influence do I have? Those are strong temptations, and it's something where looking at the state of the church now and the recent studies that have come up, especially among Orthodox Christians, we are the ones who are losing the children that we've raised in the church. They're going away. And that question, why is this happening? What can we do? It's easy to get in despair about that. And so this book was meant to be an encouragement for that, to take the parent by the hand and walk together as parents trying to raise little saints in the church. That it's not out of our hands. We haven't lost control. We aren't losing our families. It's not a lost cause, that this little church can be built on a solid foundation, which your children can then walk out on as they get older.
Absolutely. And I think, like Caleb just mentioned, the little church, which is such a beautiful concept. And I just want to sort of touch on that, because St. John Chrysostom actually used the phrase. He said, "For indeed a house is a little church. Thus it is possible for us, by becoming good husbands and wives, to surpass all others." And so he's saying, your family is a little church. We have the larger church, right? We have, say, patriarchs, and under them we have bishops, and of course the patriarchs together all form the larger Orthodox Church. And then we come down into maybe a metropolis or an archdiocese, and then you come down further, you have just individual parishes where the priest is in charge of the parish. And then our home is like its own little church. So the parents become, the father's the priest, the wife is the Marushka or the presbytera, and we're there to shepherd our children and to lead them in the church. So we become the smallest unit of the church. Well, the individual person is the smallest unit of the church, but we're the next step up. And that's an important responsibility that we take on in our weddings, in ceremony. In the book, we talk a little bit about the ceremony itself and the point at which we're crowned. Those are crowns of martyrdom, because we'll be sacrificing for this family. But they're also crowns that reflect that you're in charge of this little kingdom. You're in charge of this little church. And so we need to take that seriously. And that can be, a little intimidating perhaps. But if you break it down into something simple, like if you think about it as a rhythm of life, it's a little bit easier to handle. And so we've been sort of translating these ideas into that idea of a rhythm, because that's what Orthodoxy is, right? We have our church calendar, our fasting cycles, we have rhythms, and we have daily rhythms. In the monasteries, they would pray the hours, right? And some families are praying the hours. But however you do it, it doesn't have to be something huge like that. There is a rhythm in your home. And whether you know it or not, you already have a rhythm. And so we can just look at our rhythms and be really intentional about working them into an Orthodox structure.
Yeah, and that idea of structure and patterns and rhythms led to the idea of a blueprint for your church. And we're looking to build things. This is not something that happens overnight. We build our church piece by piece and element by element. And so in the book, we try to focus very specifically on those 3 foundation stones, those 3 pillars of the church that we're so familiar with in Orthodoxy, and prayer and fasting and almsgiving, and how to make those a part of our family's rhythm. Because our family rhythm in the 21st century can be very hectic. It can be stressful with one child, let alone with 4 or 5 or more children, to try and do all those things we think we should do, that we miss out on all the things we could be doing or the things we can do, given the time and the ability that we have. And so we really try and delve pretty deeply into all 3 of those elements, the prayer and the fasting and the almsgiving, and what those look like in our families, and also how you can start to strengthen those and to lay those foundation stones, in your own family. Because it's not, as we were saying earlier, one of the most important things we can do for one of the most important things we can do for our little church and its future success and strength is to be that godly influence. St. John Chrysostom also says to parents to take their children by the hand and lead them into the church. And that's an important role that I think we try to take very seriously as we wrote the book, that you have this calling and responsibility for your family. We want to make this easy for you to struggle together, an easy struggle, a joyful martyrdom as we go.
Absolutely. And of course, easy struggle, right? That it's difficult. We're not suggesting that it's easy to do, but we're just saying if we take this piece by piece, and if we're all company for each other, whether, ideally the book is company, but you have perhaps company in your parish and in your family and other families who are working to accomplish the same things, God willing, as a community, we come together and we work our way through this. And as we do have responsibility for our households. And I think sometimes one of the tendencies is to say, well, I'm not really in charge of our schedule because, the kids have soccer and that is when it is. And the kids have piano lessons and the kids have all these different things. There are all these extracurriculars and there are outside activities that seem to be pushing ever more and putting more and more pressure on the family unit. Certainly the modern American family in general tends to be overscheduled and overstressed and running from thing to thing. And you hear a lot of people talking about how they can't eat dinner as a family because people are coming home from work and running to soccer practice and running here and there, and the only option is to grab something on the way. And so one thing I think where we start is to slow down and look at our lives and say, there is a rhythm in this life. And if the rhythm is really just being set by coaches and administrators and other people's expectations, maybe we need to slow down and look at that schedule and determine whether or not it's something that we really approve of. If we're the parents and we're in charge, we need to be looking at the schedule and making sure that it's something reasonable. And once we start looking at it, we'll start to see, well, there is really an opening. Like, we probably could say prayers in the 4 minutes that the kids are tying their shoes before we run out the door. We probably could do morning prayers in that little window. We could squeeze it in. And we can find ways of looking at our calendar and squeezing it in and building in these Orthodox rhythms of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving so that our lives begin to follow this intentional rhythm that we've chosen and that hasn't just been sort of chosen for us at random by people who don't care about our little church, but that have been chosen by us and orchestrated by us.
Yeah, and I think that idea is really important, that you as the parents, you as the leaders of the family are the ones who need to be taking responsibility for how your family spends its time and what it does. And those expectations, those external expectations can be really, really daunting. We have social obligations, we have church obligations, we have, broader family obligations. What are we going to do on Mother's Day with it's grandma's turning 90, but it's also a feast day. What are we going to do? There's a lot that calls on us from different places. And as I said earlier, it's so easy to get distracted by what I should be doing that we miss out on the opportunity to do what I can do. Oh, every Orthodox Christian must do X, whatever X is. And I say, I can't do that because I can't fast like a monk, or I can't pray like a monk, or I'm not as holy as that family at church whose children never disobey. My children are constantly running around. I can't do that. I can't do that. Well, no one's asking you to. Where are you getting those expectations from? Are those coming from a realistic source? Are those being informed by a relationship with your priest? Are they being informed by a relationship with the church? Or are they being informed by the internet or your own personal insecurities? Those are important questions. And so establishing realistic expectations for your family is really important. What will services look like for us? What will prayer time look for us? What will fasting times look for us? How will we give of our time and our treasure? Not how are somebody else doing it, or how did they do it in the 19th century? how am I doing it now? What can my family truly, realistically do? Um, my family has 4 children, all under the age of 8 years old. We can't do reader services every hour, but we can pray for 10 minutes, or we can pray for 5 minutes. Last night we had a family game night that went long. Prayer time was the Lord's Prayer, and we went to bed. But we made that point that we would say prayers before bedtime. We would say prayers first thing in the day, and those were realistic expectations. We will pray as we can, when we can, not as we are imposing on ourselves from some different source. And the same is true of any of the other disciplines of the church. What can your family realistically do? What can your family reasonably do? How will you start to develop your little church piece by piece? Not, can I slap it all together as quickly as possible and see if it stands, but slowly and patiently building those rhythms into your life.
Right. Well, I think, in fact, that's one of Father Tom Hofko's 55 maxims, right? Pray as you can, not as you think you must, right? You see what you can do, and that's what you can do today. And I think, one of the most valuable things I ever heard as a parent, and just in terms of setting those expectations and understanding how this was going to look as a family, was we had a wonderful presbytera who said to me, well, there's a season for everything, and maybe this just isn't your season for coming to Vespers every week. It was kind of funny because I had a little girl who was screaming and screaming, and just Saturday nights, that was after her bedtime or whatever, it was after her tolerance level, I guess you would say. And it was crazy. And she was like, maybe for a couple of months, this just isn't your season, and you'll be back, and there will be another time when you're better able to do this. And it really just kind of opened up my eyes to this idea that, when you have children, when you're raising a family, there are going to be times when things are going really well, and then there are going to be times when you have to back off, and that we have to really be flexible and ready to adjust for what our own family needs. So first, we have to make the decision that our family needs to be in the rhythm of the church. We have to know for sure that we're committed to raising our kids in an Orthodox home. Once we know that, it's going to be very much up to us how that's going to be applied. And so if that means, where do you start, right? Let's say you don't pray as a family at this time, or you do here and there, right? It's simple, start with the Lord's Prayer, right? Or, we even, in the book, we include some stories from parents, and we ask parents, we put out a survey to a huge group of our friends, and we were just saying, what does prayer time look like at your house? What does fasting look like at your house? And we got a different answer from every person. It's different for every family. And there was one family, their kids are young, and they have speech delays. So prayer time for the family, they stand together, dad maybe reads the Lord's Prayer, and then each of the kids say, Lord, have mercy. Because that's their ability. They're not able to say the Lord's Prayer. They're able to say, Lord, have mercy. And you know what? That's a really good prayer. And so that's a very beautiful thing. So they may not be reading, the whole evening prayer section of whichever prayer book they have on their icon table, but they're doing a prayer that's appropriate and that's the right amount of time for them. And so that's what we need to think about. And I think the best advice, as Caleb mentioned, we don't slap together a church when we build a church, right? We build a foundation, we slowly build up, the beginnings of the walls, and things get taller and taller, more and more established over time. So to start, for instance, with prayers, start with one simple prayer that you're happy to start with, and say it with your kids at night before you go to bed. And then try to add, maybe after a while, a morning prayer real quickly, maybe in the car even, as you're going to drop everybody off at home, maybe while they're tying their shoes and they're getting their stuff together, maybe you walk over to the icons and say, guys, if you can, come join me, and you say the Lord's Prayer. And then the ones who can will come, and the ones who are running late will be praying in their heads. And eventually, though, if that becomes your family's rhythm, if you're intentional about it, and you just quietly establish every morning and every night, this is what we do, not only do they become pretty cooperative with it because they know that it's coming, they're prepared for it, they run over and they do it, but eventually you get to a point where they'll remind you of it. Or one of my favorite things was, I was out the other night, we had a meeting at church, we're trying to build a building, a lot of meetings. So I'm at this meeting, my kids are home with my 17-year-old. And when I get back, they're telling me, oh, well, during prayers, so-and-so was doing this. And I thought to myself, that's nice. I wasn't home. My husband wasn't home. They did bedtime prayers. Of course they did, because that's part of going to bed. And so as they grow up into adults, and as my oldest goes off to college and the other kids do, they know that that's part of the rhythm. And that's really what you're aiming for. You're playing the long run picture here, right? We're looking for the kids to know that you say prayers before bed, not for everybody to be perfect today and get it exactly right today, but in the big picture.
And that's really so much of what this book is about. We're looking at the long picture. It's not about, did we say a full morning prayer rule from whatever prayer book we're using, but did we pray together as a family? Did we take the time? If you took the time in your family to say the Lord's Prayer when you wake up, bless each meal with a quick blessing, and then say the Lord's Prayer before you went to bed, you would have prayed 5 times together as a family. Even if you're not eating all those meals together, if your children know a quick, say a quick bless our food, or a quick, to quickly cross themselves and thank the Lord for their food at meal times, your family is praying together in those moments. Your little church is at prayer during those meal times and during those times together. I think it's very tempting to look at what we're not doing, or to judge ourselves very harshly by external sources. And there's that's just true, not even in spiritual life, but elsewhere. There's any number of external judges we put up for ourselves. And something we read from Father Seraphim Rose was said, don't worry too much about how spiritually poor you are. God sees that. But for you, it's expected to trust in God and to pray to him as best you can, never to fall into despair, and to struggle according to your strength. Your family may have the maturity and the guts to pray long prayers. Maybe you do have the time and the ability to pray Reader's Vespers. I mean, God bless you. That's not something my family can do, but that's not where we're at. That's not where our goal is, to pray together, because prayer in the family is strong. Prayer in the family brings amazing spiritual blessings on parents and on children. And if the house is a little church, then it is possible for us to grow the spiritual lives of each member in that church when we do things intentionally. Like Elissa said, make it a habit, make it expected. My 5-year-old daughter cannot go to sleep at night if we don't say prayers. She will come to us in tears if we say bedtime, lights out time, and we have forgotten to say our prayers. I haven't prayed yet. You're right, we haven't prayed yet. It's late, it's past your bedtime, the lights seem to go out, but we will say prayers. That's what we will do. It's part of our routine and part of our rhythm. Won't pray a long time, but we will make sure that we always say prayers, because it's easy to look at how little time you have if all you're looking at is how busy you appear to be on the surface. Something that we encourage in the book is for mom and dad especially to sit down with the schedule and determine how much time is actually being spent doing other things. The average person looks at their phone every 15 seconds. That's a lot of time to look at your phone. Could those 15 seconds be spent saying the Jesus Prayer? If you took, instead of looking at your phone for a half hour, you took a half hour to read, or on your phone you were reading your prayers, or on your phone you were reading the daily lectionary or the lives of the saints, that might be an interesting way to spend your time. I don't have any time to pray, but you had 15 hours over the weekend to binge a Netflix series. Maybe that 15 hours you could have taken 5 minutes to say prayers as a family, or to say prayers for yourself. And it is tempting to see how busy you are and to ignore the free time, especially in the midst of busy schedules. Your kids are running in different places. You've got all these activities and obligations with church and community and family. So one of the first things we suggest doing is just sitting down together as a family and budget that time out. How much time are you really spending on things that are obligations, really important obligations? Look at your day, look at your week, look at your month. not even the full year, not even compared to the church calendar, just average week, how much time are we spending out and about doing things? On the average month, how much time are we spending on other obligations? How long do those actually take? Could we be in this time doing something to the benefit, the spiritual benefit of our family? So yeah, just starting in those small places.
Absolutely. And then once we make that decision and we say, you know what, we do have 5 minutes for prayers in the morning. We do have 5 minutes for prayers in the evening, right? Start there. We start small, say the Lord's Prayer. And then over time, as it becomes more natural and it's more comfortable for your family, you can start adding other prayers. And if you get a good prayer book, I know almost every archdiocese has kind of a standard prayer book, different jurisdictions like different ones, right? But whatever one is most natural to your family, which usually is the one that's being used in your parish, because it'll sound like the way that the translation that you're using in church. So maybe talk to your priest if you don't already have one. But I really like, there's a Greek archdiocese one. It's a little blue book. It's real simple with a cross on the front. And that one, it has very simple language that I think kids can learn. Although even if you're using a complex translation, I think there's a little like educational side benefit where your kids learn some really long words. So it works out nicely. But if you can have prayer books, ideally maybe prayer books for the whole family or everybody who can read, or even just print up some prayers that you like. At one point in our life, we had printed several different prayers on small slips of paper, and we put them out on the icon table. And we were like, because the girls were getting, at the time we probably had 3 or 4 girls, and they were just getting really restless during prayers, and they weren't really focusing. So I decided to get their attention by putting out all these different prayers, psalms and prayers from prayer books. And I said, pick out your favorites. I want each of you to pick one, and you'll read your prayer at prayer time. So we'll all do the Lord's Prayer together. You each pick one, we'll do that prayer. And we gave them some power in arranging, like, what is the prayer rule? What are the prayers we're going to say? And they really enjoyed it. And they took a lot of pride in having selected a prayer. And sometimes they would pick different ones on different nights. And that's worked out really well for us to keep the kids engaged. But I almost don't want to even say to keep the kids engaged, because I don't want to give you the impression that my kids are always just standing there and thrilled to be praying and they're super focused, because sometimes they are. And I have 5 kids, so usually probably 2 of them are. And one of them is sort of standing there, but maybe keeps trying to lean on the wall and looking around. And then there's, going to be one spinning around and being awful. And that's just kind of how it goes. And so you kind of decide what your tolerance level is in your family. It probably depends on your kid's age and how able they are to be still. But it is wise, I think, to present it as a holy time so that they're kind of learning to behave in a certain way that then you're going to try to follow through with. When you go to church, you're going to want them to behave that way. And you kind of create like, okay, this is a prayerful mindset. This is what that looks like. But with really little kids, I mean, if they're jumping up and down, but they're still standing in front of the icons with you as you're praying, and you kind of notice that here and there they're crossing themselves and they're saying amen, you're doing great. That's good. With a toddler, that's where your expectation is, right? And as they get older, and especially as they read, I think that they tend to interact more. They tend to get more involved in it. Other things that are great for praying with kids, when you're arranging your icons, if your children have certain icons that they love, often we'll have icons in the kids' rooms. I know that's pretty normal in Orthodox homes, but you could also let the kids pick out some small icons that could go in the icon corner here and there as that comes up. You could always put up icons that they love so that they have the sense that they're also participating in the creation of this little church and that they are important members. So they could pick icons, they could pick prayers. As they get older, they can light the candles. Certainly even when they're little, it could be their job to blow out candles. If you don't have candles on your icon stand, that's okay. But over time, that's what we layer it, right? We start out, maybe it's just one icon on the wall. Then later, maybe it's more icons. Maybe you add candles, maybe even incense as you get very advanced, you're doing a great job. And then the kids can have jobs that have to do with getting all of that going and being part of the prayers. And you'll see as they grow older that they really begin to take ownership of it, and that becomes, it's a very natural part of your family's function.
That is something that's been really true in our own family several years ago. someone posted a PDF file on it might have even been on Pinterest, a prayer book they used with their own children. And it was very simple. You could print it. It had Trisagion prayers, essentially, plus the 10 Commandments and the Beatitudes and several icons. And the idea was to print it out, cut out the pages, and slip them into a little photo album. Oh, we have updated that photo album every year since the first year we did it, because our prayer rule may change with different things. We really focused for a couple of years where our only prayers were those Trisagion prayers. And then we added "It is truly me" and a dismissal, and then we added the creed, and then we've added more prayers as we go along. But my children still expect the prayers we're praying to be in that book. So if we add new prayers and they aren't in the book, it becomes a source of consternation, and we have to make sure that everyone sees where the prayers are. We're not just making them up, because that's an ownership for them. They love having that book. Only one of my children can actually read, but all three of them, who can stand and hold the book without using it as a weapon, want to hold the prayer book, and they want to know where we're praying. And if you do something very simple like that, that just brings them into the moment so quickly. Because mom and dad are reading from books. I want to know what the prayers are, even if I don't know what the words are on the page. And it's also easy for mom and dad, because you can say, turn to the page with the icon of Jesus on the throne. Turn to the page with the icon of the angels. Turn to the page with the icon of Saint Seraphim. And they can start to recognize these saints by name and by look, and also start to associate them with a life of prayer. A quote about this that we really enjoyed and put into the book was that someone was asked, then elder, now Saint Paisios, the Athonite, about whether or not families should pray the entire compline service together. And his response is something we really latched onto for the book. That older members of the family can help to motivate younger families, and if they can, they should try and say compline together. But the message you give to the younger children is that if you want to stay for a little while. While the children are younger, have a simple rule for them. Maybe it's just a couple minutes. Maybe it's one prayer. Maybe it's two prayers for small children. And then after you've prayed their prayers with them, they can go on. Parents and older children stay and finish compline together. And he likens it to weaning children. Introduce them to solid food. You don't give
Caleb, you're kind of going out for me. I don't know if anybody else is noticing that. Yeah, but Caleb's talking about a quote from, it's actually St. Paisios on family life. And it is really beautiful, because he talks about how children, when they're not ready for meat, will just get milk, and that I think St. Paul also uses that in the epistles, of course. So it's a beautiful image for saying that we start them off small and we add on. So especially in a big family where you may have teenage children and toddlers, you can be doing a more complex prayer rule with the older kids. And then the little ones can just be invited to come in and out of it. Or maybe there's a specified, you have to be here for the Lord's Prayer. I do that in church with my little ones as well. I don't know if I have rules where it's like, well, okay, you can sit and stare out the window, but when it comes time for the gospel, we're going to focus, we're going to stand up, and we kind of give her little breaks, and then there are different spots where they really need to focus. And I think that's important with the young ones, that we want to ease them into it, I think. But it also gets difficult with older kids, right, with teenagers. And sometimes you'll have situations where teens resist prayer time. I think a lot of times just to figure out what would happen if they resisted prayer time. And in our house, it's always just sort of been, everybody's required to be here with us and behave in a respectful, prayerful manner. But I always tell my older kids, I don't know if you're really praying. That's not my business. That's between you and God. And so, I start to emphasize as the kids get older, this idea that everything that we're doing as a family is really also informing it's their personal prayer life. It's their personal relationship with God. And that I let them know, by the time they're 9 or 10, this is going to become yours, right? This is something that we're doing together, and I have a spiritual life and you have a spiritual life. So some of these things are between them and God already. So as parents, we also want to think about the idea that we're on a trajectory. And we've said, we're kind of thinking long term. We're thinking about whether they're going to be praying when they're in college, when they're our age, when they're old and gray like us, or just me maybe. But when we're looking at that long term, we want to even say to the children, right? Like, this is your faith life. And so if you're here, Caleb's back. Welcome back, Caleb. I want you here with our family. You're in church with us. You're saying prayers with us. But it's your place to work out what prayers are to you and your relationship with God, and that we want to be starting that, I think, fairly young, maybe before you would think, maybe at 9 or 10, pointing out to them that this is theirs. And in fact, actually, the time when it really becomes ideal to start talking with kids that way about that transitioning to owning their own faith would be, I think, when you start talking about fasting in a family. And that we have a chapter on fasting. And it was funny. In fact, the publisher was a little nervous, like, oh, but how will you talk about fasting? Because fasting is such a touchy, tricky subject. And I think, in some ways, some people look at fasting and it seems like it's pretty easy for them to just limit their diet, and that's fine. And for other people, it's like the most personal, difficult struggle in the world. And so sometimes it's hard to talk about it. But I think especially with children, it's difficult because the rules aren't as clear with children, because we don't really understand necessarily at what age can a child start fasting, and how does a child start fasting? Is this something gentle that you do? Is this something very sudden? Well, it's your 8th birthday, now you're going to fast, And then when you ask, you'll get a different answer, a very confident, very emphatic answer from each person, and it'll be somewhat different depending on who you're talking to. So I think Caleb and I kind of looked at it, and we had sort of looked at all the material and said, I think in the end, it's fair to say there's not a right answer for when you start. But one of the first things that you're doing as parents is role modeling fasting. And so as you work fasting into your family, and again, this looks different, right? I've been to parishes where fasting meant that there was no oil and there was obviously no dairy and no milk or no meat, right? But then there are other places where sometimes people eat fish when they're fasting. But then, in another jurisdiction or another region, you'll find that people really are eating dairy pretty often, but they're not eating meat. So it's hard to say. And I think in general, you talk to your priest, you talk about what your parish is doing. But whatever you're doing, you want to be fasting as a community in the group. You want to be fasting on the church calendar, because that's so important. This is what we call an ecclesiastical fast, in the sense that it's not individual. It's not like a modern diet, right? I've decided to lose some weight, so I'm going on a low carb diet. And so I'll do that when I feel like doing that. But whenever we're doing anything in the church, we're doing it together. So we have this beautiful rhythm in the church and this beautiful calendar. So we're all fasting together and in the same way. And so we really want to consult with our priest and make sure that we're fasting in the same way. And sometimes if you're in a parish where people don't really fast, talk to your priest about it, work it out. But maybe you're the one who's going to be the role model who's going to get that started. At any rate, it looks different in every family because there are different dietary restrictions. There are all kinds of different situations going on. Sometimes both of the parents in a family are really happy to start fasting, and sometimes maybe only one parent is happy to be fasting. And so I think you do what you can, right? You do what you can, not what you think you must. As Father Tom would say, you do your best. And you start it, even if it's just you fasting, you start yourself. And then you gently increase it a little bit here and there. And even the youngest kids, the ones, a toddler who really needs their protein and their fats and all of this, there are some people who are pretty gifted at making sure that they get everything they need out of a vegan kind of diet. And that is excellent. And so, of course, they can do that. And if you're not doing that, though, you can say, we're not going to have ice cream. Today's Wednesday. Today's a fasting day. And yes, you're little, so you're going to have a cheese stick added to your lunch today, and you're going to get a little ham slipped in on your plate when everybody else is fasting because you're young, but we're not going to have ice cream. It's something like that that kind of says to the family, today's a fasting day, and we all respect that in the way that we can, whatever level that is.
And that was something in our own family, because at the time when we were becoming Orthodox, we were on public assistance. And so our refrigerator was full of milk and cheese and eggs. And we really struggled with that. We were supposed to be fasting. And our spiritual father at the time just said, you are in a position where you cannot fast. It would A, be wasteful, and B, which would be a sin. And B, you'd be communicating something that isn't true. And so we ate as we were instructed to eat, and ate with gratitude. And we were very specific with the children. Though, this is Great Lent. This is our fasting time now. Right now we are fasting. Some people will not eat meat. Some people will not drink milk. Some people will not have eggs. We are having them because God has provided them for us, and we're going to be grateful for those. But this is our fasting time. And so we tried to bring the fast into our house in other ways that were practical. So extra prayers. My children absolutely love to pray the prayer of Saint Ephrem the Syrian. We just call it the Big Bows Prayer. Just call it the Big Bows Prayer, because they love to do the prostrations in the middle of it. Just that was enough to set off the season of fasting for us, and to communicate that right now we are being careful with what we eat. We're being aware of the food we are eating, and we are adding prayers so that we can be alert and aware of what God is asking us for us to do in our lives. And the same is true with almsgiving. If you're in a family where giving extra financially might be more than you can really take on the family budget, find other ways to give of your time. Find other ways to give of your treasures if you have them. What are ways that you can be serving your parish community? What are the ways you can serve your city or your town? What are the ways you can serve your country? What are the ways you can serve people around the world that maybe don't require a monetary gift, but they require a sacrifice from you of something? I am giving of myself out of gratitude to God for what he has given to me, and I'm giving of myself for the benefit and the betterment of somebody else, taking my eyes off of my own condition and seeking to make somebody else's life, somebody else's situation in life better. Maybe you can't afford to do it with money, but there's so much we can do just day to day for our neighbors, which are giving of our alms to them.
That's right. Well, and truly, even in a family that has a lot of disposable income and is able to give monetarily, the children aren't really necessarily giving monetarily in that situation, right? That's something that the parents are doing. The kids might not even see it, right? It's entirely possible, and in some cases advisable, right? You don't necessarily share all of those details with your kids. You could be writing checks to the church and the kids don't know it. So how do we raise our kids with that third pillar, almsgiving? And so I think with children especially who don't have the same kind of income, although sometimes they have allowances or they might come across some money, and when they do, it really is a great thing to say to them, hey, you know what? How much of this can we give away, and how much of this are we keeping? And to start teaching them that sense of like proportional giving, right? That we're going to try to give, we're going to aim for maybe 10 cents out of every dollar, or whatever your aim is. We're going to pick some number and we're going to try to give that much every time. But for some families, like in my family, my kids there's not a lot of cash that goes through their hands over time. So it doesn't become a part of the rhythm of the home. That's kind of a side note, right? So how can it be part of the rhythm? Well, almsgiving can be service to others, right? So it can be in the parish. It can be in charitable conditions, right? So maybe as a family, we can go help sort food at the food pantry. Maybe as a family, we can go to the nursing home and we can sit and read stories. We can be very intentional. Again, we talk about, in the book, we talk a lot about budgeting time. And some of that time needs to be tithed, in a sense. Some of that time should be part of your stewardship, should be something that's given back to the world. And so you build that into your rhythm. If you have soccer practice 2 hours after school's out on Thursdays, is there time maybe before you go to practice every week to run in for half an hour to the nursing home that's over near the field and just stop in and say hi to a few people, and maybe the kids have drawn some pictures or something? There are little things that we can do that do make a big difference in people's lives and are very beautiful, and they make a big impression on our kids in terms of showing them that part of their life's rhythm is going to be service to others. And so I think that's with the almsgiving to children, that the money focus needs to be moved more to like the time and the talent. And of course money too, but time and talent especially.
Yeah, that's something where we have started to there are a handful of chores that my children do because they are part of this family and they are responsible for their own things. And there are things they do to serve others in the family. And those things have only recently had a dollar attached to them. They can earn their money, but that money comes at the end of the week on Saturday night or Sunday morning. And there's a discussion about, this money, part of this money needs to go to the church. Part of this money needs to be saved.
I'm losing
Part of
Caleb.
this money.
Caleb, I can't hear you.
There
There you go.
Better? Okay, sorry.
That's good.
Sorry. But part of this money needs to be saved and part of this money can be spent. And we have encouraged them even to just take some of that money to buy their own candle. It's so small, but it really brings home to them their responsibility financially, as well as their time. You use this time, give some of it back to God by just buying your own candle at church. And that really made an impact on the two older children who are making the money with their chores. Like, wow, this is something I can do. It's not very much, but it's just something that giving of themselves to the beauty of the service, but also to add to give as they light their candle and say their prayers. It doesn't have to be exciting. It can just be very small, and it just makes a huge impact.
Yeah. Well, and probably the best almsgiving is never exciting, right? It's all
right, exactly.
And behind the scenes, and it's very beautiful, and it's good. And I think, that sort of touches on that idea of the kids, their participation in church. The more that they can feel like they're in charge of what they're doing here, the more, if they're buying their own candles, if they're lighting their own candles, as they're coming in, they have these little jobs that they do that participate. Orthodoxy is wonderful for that. I mean, we're very lucky. There are a lot of Christians out there writing books right now trying to figure out how you're going to incorporate the 5 senses into worship. And here we are, we have it already for us, thank God. But there are a lot of things that the kids can do to be a part of things at the church. And I know we've been talking for a while. I don't know if anybody has questions that we need to answer. Is there any clarification that is needed?
There were a couple of questions that did come in, and thank you. We've had a lot of technical issues this webinar, so I apologize for my disappearance early on. But as I was saying, when I disappeared early on, there's a Q&A box, so feel free to type any questions you want in there. And, if we're not flooded with too many, we'll try to get to as many as we can. But a couple questions did come in. One was just about the book, and they wanted to know, is the book mostly concept or more practical ideas, such as examples, what has worked or may work, or a bit of both? I was going to answer that myself, but I thought I'll let you guys do it because you know better than me. So
it's a bit of both, intentionally a bit of both. We began with concepts. We wanted to begin with a why, and then we moved on to what and how throughout each chapter, but also we included an appendix at the back of the book that kind of walks through the church year of some specific things families can do to start to integrate the church calendar into their lives.
And one of the things I particularly like that you did about the book is that you did focus on different family stories throughout. In other words, you're not just saying you have to do it like my family or her family does it. You focused and you brought in different family stories, and you really emphasized that it's your own personal, trying to figure out how it works for your family, which I really, really appreciated. And then, and I'm wondering if, Caleb, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay.
I'm just moving.
A different picture of you. Okay.
I'm just moving locations. I have children coming home, and so I need to change locations.
Somebody wanted to know the name of the book that your kids who can hold a book without hitting someone get to hold during their time. I
don't know that it has a name to it. It's a file someone uploaded to a website that we downloaded.
Do you still have that link? Is that something we could send out to share with everyone?
I will look for it. My wife will know where it is because that is her annual St. Nicholas Day project.
All right.
So she will. I will let you know, and I'll send that into you. So you
okay. So if we're able to get that from Caleb, we will email it out to everyone that registered for this and tie it into the video so that for those that watch it after the fact can get it. So thank you. Okay. Any other questions that people have? Lovely conversation. Thank you very much. My question to both presenters is, what was the reason for your converting to Orthodoxy. I'm always curious about this. Thank you, and God bless.
You want to go first, Caleb, or me?
Sure. Boy, that was a long story. I first encountered Orthodoxy in full. I say in full, kind of with an understanding of what I was looking at when I was in graduate school. I was living with a guy who was a catechumen at the time, and I was raised Presbyterian, but always had kind of a love of liturgical services. I loved the ritual and the colors and the lights and the sounds and the smells. And so I was attending the local Anglican communion church on like Easter Vigil and other feast days. And he really challenged me, what are you doing? What are you looking for? I didn't have a good answer for that. I just thought I could be a liturgical Presbyterian. And then I went to his baptism, and the man who went into the water was not the same man who came out. It was just really watching somebody be born again, like right in front of my eyes. And then that stuck. That seed planted deep, and I watered it gently and unintentionally sometimes, but I started to add patterns to my life, which were very Orthodox, daily prayers and other things. And so at the time, back in 2010, I lost a job working for a church that I was on staff at. And my wife and I kind of looked at each other and said, well, where are we going to go next? And a friend of mine just challenged me, like, why wouldn't you look further into Orthodoxy? We didn't have a good answer to that question, except that our parents wouldn't like it. And that was it. We just said, okay, let's just take our time and see. And then 2 years later, we were chrismated. But it wasn't always easy. It wasn't always fun. But there was definitely this sense of progression. Things are coming. God is at work here, and we're going to keep following where Christ leads us.
That's beautiful. On the other hand, I was raised non-denominational Christian. I had a very strong faith, but we did not go to church. My family lived way out in the country. I would say my parents resisted authority, which is why we lived out in the middle of nowhere and didn't have a church. But as I grew up, I ended up going to a Catholic school, and I saw the Mass, and I really was drawn to the worship. But I never was drawn really to the Catholic Church, but there was something really interesting to me. And then over the years, I met my husband, who's Serbian. So he was Orthodox. And I just tried to talk him out of being Orthodox for years, and it didn't work. And finally, I knew that we needed to be the same faith. I knew that I wanted to be the same faith as him. And it took me until right up before my first daughter was born when I did not convert when we got married. I converted after we were married when I was pregnant, and I was really struggling. We were in churches that didn't speak any English, and I didn't speak any Serbian, and it was really hard for me. I would go to the priests and I would ask about the church, and it just felt like the way that their vocabulary didn't match my vocabulary, which of course now I understand, because Protestant vocabulary really is so different from Orthodox vocabulary that we're not speaking the same language, even if we're all speaking English. And so I really struggled with understanding what Orthodoxy was. And I took that decision very seriously. So I took my time. And finally, I was baptized just before my daughter was born. But I would say that even then, I don't know that I really got it. I decided that I went to a liturgy in English, and I heard it. And I was very much praying during the liturgy, asking God if he was there and if this is where I was supposed to go. And I felt very strongly that God was there, and that this was a good place to be. But I don't know if I really got that Orthodoxy was the church. I was just kind of like, yes, this is a church that will work. And I was baptized, and we started coming to church on Sundays, and I really felt like I was doing my job. Kids were here every Sunday. Awesome, we're Orthodox. And it took me a while. We ran into difficult situations in life. We had a daughter with a cleft lip and palate who needed many surgeries. And that was kind of the first time that suddenly the priest is coming to the hospital with us, and suddenly I'm seeing the church like invade other parts of my life that are not happening on Sunday. And that really meant something to me and started opening my eyes. And then I would say, though, the day that I really finally became Orthodox would be, we had a son who passed away. He was very young. He died of SIDS. And when Luca died, I started going to my priest all the time, just knocking on his door constantly, like, okay, my son's in heaven, what does that mean? Like, what do we mean when we say this and when we say that, and memory eternal, and what is that? And I really started demanding answers from him. And I started realizing that so many of the ideas I had been raised with were so different from Orthodoxy, and that Orthodoxy made so much more sense than the way that things were structured in my head, that I had that kind of atonement theory idea going. And then, when you hit up against it and it's like, well, God as part of his plan, that's really hard to deal with. And the Orthodox view of things makes so much more sense with a loving God. So for me, that was really the experience that I think converted me, despite the fact that I was already going to church and I was Orthodox. But it was really that time when I decided that it was time to comb through all of my beliefs and uproot things that were not Orthodox, and to really trust the church and to really believe what the church believed. And I would say that's when I really became Orthodox. And that has just completely changed everything, like the lights coming on in the darkness. It's been beautiful. So I'm just grateful to be in the church. I'm happy.
Thank you so much for both sharing your personal journeys and stories. I think it's something that's very powerful to all of us. There was one more kind of question that came in, but just thanking you for the book. They were recently chrismated with their children, and they're struggling with explaining to these 3-year-old twins that they have about God, Jesus, and his death. We have facts, but how have you shifted your understanding of salvation and moving beyond the paying for our sins idea?
That is such a great question.
Wow.
Yeah. I think first of all, with 3-year-olds, you're always going to struggle, right? Because they are so concrete. And when you're dealing with spiritual truths that become abstract and transcendent, it is hard to bring it back down. I really feel that the Orthodox are gifted with Holy Week, with this beautiful understanding of Christ going into Hades. That is something I did not understand before I became Orthodox, right? I'm sure there are some Protestants, some people, whatever, but in my understanding, in my world, that wasn't there. So my sense is being able to explain the story that all of these human beings are in Hades and they can't get out and they can't get to God. And God is light, right? So Hades is dark and they're in the darkness, just waiting, good, bad, indifferent. They're all there waiting. And then in order to get to Hades, Christ has to become a dead person, right? He's going to be invited in, because he's not going to just break it open with force, but he actually comes in and goes through the gate like he's supposed to go. So he becomes a dead human being and goes into Hades. And I always like the phrase from Holy Friday, he tricked the trickster, that, Satan is this trickster who tricked us in Eden, and Christ tricks him. And so he welcomes in. If you go back through, is it the Holy Saturday? I think it's, if you go on the Go Arch website to Holy Saturday in the Great Lent, you'll find all of these beautiful hymns and these phrases you can talk about with your kids about the idea that Hades accepts a body, but instead it receives God, and that Christ is just uncontainable, and so he just blows it all apart. And I think when you look at it with that storyline and that sense of what work Christ is doing, the death becomes incidental to, his suffering for us is obviously tremendous, but sometimes kids can get so focused on how mean it was to have crucified Christ that it's good to open up for them that side of why God would allow such a thing. And it's so that Christ can go into Hades and he can break open the gates and bring everyone out, that the light itself can go into Hades, if that makes sense.
With my 3-year-old is quick to sing the Paschal Troparion. As soon as anybody, doesn't matter who it is, talks about Jesus dying on the cross, he instantly jumps into Christ is risen from the dead. Doesn't matter where we are, what time of the year it is, who he's talking to. That is his first response. And I think at 3, that's what I need you to know. Christ is risen from the dead. He has trampled death by death. He has bestowed life on those in the tombs. And so much gets abstract and so much gets big with me, especially being, where I come from. I talk in really big ideas a lot. So with my 3-year-old, to hear him say those words, I was like, that's what I need you to know right now, to understand that. We were at I don't remember where we were, but they were giving part of this event was this gospel presentation at the local Protestant church, and he went. They said Christ died on the cross, and he went, "Christ is risen from the dead." It's like, yes, good. we own this. This is part of our DNA. This is part of who we are. And I think, especially with young ones, there's so much they can latch on to in our daily and weekly practices and the church calendar. It's so easy to try and start big and try and make it like break down the big concept into little things. Start with the little things. Let the big things grow. Think seeds. Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven being like leaven. I mean, yeast is so tiny, but you put a little bit of yeast into the mix, and the bread rises. A seed grows into a plant, and that yields a crop, and it yields fruit. That's time. It's incremental. Don't try and change their minds about atonement theory. They don't have any ideas about atonement theory. They're 3 years old. Work on that. This is what we do believe. We believe that Christ rose from the dead, that he destroyed death with his death, and he brought us to life. And start with that if that's what they can latch on to, and let that grow over time, especially where they're little. Don't try and understand it for yourself and then try and understand it for them. They are going to grow up understanding the Orthodox belief. Work on that. Fertilize that.
And I think, and I don't know what you all think about this, but I think it's important for us as parents, because every single one of us has been asked a question about the church, from our kids, where we're like, I have no idea how to answer it. And that's okay. That's all right. That's part of the thing, is that we're constantly growing and learning. And I think it says at the end of the Gospel of John, if we knew everything, about Christ, the world itself could not contain the book. So we're going to be constantly struggling to find the right words and stuff for that. And it's okay to say, I'm not sure how to answer that, or I'm not sure, let's look into that and talk and get together with other parents, with your priest, to find answers. And one book that I just wanted to share as a resource, it's a book called Conversations with Children by Sister Magdalene. And she literally has like questions that kids have asked that you're like, how do I answer this? And she talks about how she answered it. And I just feel like I personally grew learning more about big concepts in the church by looking at some of how she answered things in a developmentally appropriate way. So I don't know if that helps at all there too. So I want to say, because I think that there's we're kind of getting to the end here, so I want to find out if there's anything else Elissa and Caleb want to touch on before I say a few closing words. So
I think just one thing to be aware of is those, just to reiterate, realistic expectations that are informed by your relationship with your priest. Don't run to the internet to try and find out how a good Orthodox family looks. Talk to your father confessor, talk to your priest and say, I've got kids, I don't know what to do. And they'll go, yeah, everyone's got kids. Let's see how we can work your family. That's the best thing you can do for your family going forward to build a little church, is to be in that trusting relationship with your priest and have them help you to lay those foundation stones. Don't try and do it on your own. Do it with help. We don't need to do this by ourselves.
All right. You know what? I just want to ask this last one because it sounds like fun here. Do you have a favorite children's books about saints? Something that put the saint's life into story form? Favorite Bible story book or book telling story of various feasts that you have, an Orthodox one?
So I have some favorites. I love A Boy, a Kitchen, and His Cave, which is a story of St. Euphrosinos. And it can be a little bit long. It's a little bit wordy, but it's one of my favorite books. My kids like it too, but it's one of my favorites. There's a book about St. Romanos called Sweet Song that Jane Meyer wrote, and that is very beautiful and really striking. I mean, honestly, you could go on. I think I love every Orthodox saint story I've ever read. There's North Star about St. Herman, that story, Papa Dimitriou. There are really a number. There's one I use a lot, is called A Children's Paradise of Saints by Nun Macarena. I can't remember. Macrina something. And anyway, A Children's Paradise of Saints. And it has maybe 20 different saints' lives. And they're written in a way that's exciting enough that when you read it to the kids, they really get into it. And that's really a good one. But I think in general, all of the Old Testament stories, I actually have a book of Old Testament stories coming out myself one of these days. possibly in time for next Christmas. But there are, whenever you read those stories to them, if you can't find a source that tells the story well, read over it yourself and then you tell it in terms that your kids will get. You know your children, you know what excites them and what interests them. And the important thing is to just be telling the stories.
Yeah, similarly, I don't know that I have found a favorite that I've used with the kids regularly, but there's so many available sources. The best thing we've done is just as parents find out about the saint and then paraphrase the story back. Reading the prologue by St. Nikolai. I love to read it myself. It's hard to read with my kids. I know some families have had success. We have not.
Yeah.
But if I can read the story and I can tell them about the saint and tell them this is what God did in their life, that more than if I try and read the narrative as it's written right there.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. This has been awesome. We've learned so much today. We do these monthly for those of you that are here with us. So we'll be sending out an email. We send out on our email listserv, which you can sign up for on our website, family.goarch.org, which will keep you informed of what our next webinar is. We're still scheduling the September one and when that's going to be and the topic of it. So that will be put out there. And also liking us on Facebook is another way to be kept informed of what we have coming out. I really want to give thanks always to Leadership 100 because it's through their constant support of our office that we're able to offer things like this to all of you at no charge. And of course, again, I can't thank Elissa and Caleb enough for your wonderful workshop today. It will be available about a week after today's broadcast. We will have it up and available for people to watch for forever. No. For quite some time. To ages of ages. Amen. So it'll be up for a while. So I thank you both so much and thank you all for attending. All right.
Thank you.